They smashed through my daughter's treehouse like it was made of paper, not the dreams of a dying mother. 3 thugs in HOA enforcement shirts were destroying the last birthday gift my wife, Rachel, ever gave our 9-year-old Chloe while my little girl screamed in terror. My coffee mug shattered on the kitchen floor as rage erupted through my body. These suburban tyrants had no idea they just declared war on the wrong father, a former Secret Service agent who'd taken bullets for presidents. I remembered the day we moved to Oakwood Trails 3 months after Rachel lost her battle with cancer. Chloe was struggling, barely speaking, spending hours alone in her room clutching her mother's old sweater. The treehouse was supposed to be her sanctuary, a place where she could feel close to her mom again. Rachel had sketched the design during her final weeks in the hospital, her frail hands shaking as she drew each detail. "Promise me, Nate," she'd whispered. "Promise me you'll build this for our little girl. She'll need somewhere to dream when I'm gone." And I did. Every nail, every board, every rope ladder rung was a labor of love, a promise kept. Building it had taken me 6 weekends working through grief and exhaustion. I'd used reclaimed oak from an old barn. Rachel had always loved the character of weathered wood. The design included a secret compartment where Chloe could keep her treasures, a reading nook with a skylight for stargazing, and wind chimes made from shells we'd collected on our last family vacation to Cape Hatteras. Tom Wilkins, the owner of the local hardware store, had donated the paint when he heard what I was building. "Lost my Linda 5 years ago," he'd said gruffly, pressing the cans into my hands. "This matters." Marlene Dalton, the HOA president, stood in my yard like she owned the place, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at my 9-year-old daughter's refuge. "This structure violates neighborhood aesthetic guidelines," she announced, her voice carrying that special brand of suburban authority that makes you want to laugh and scream at the same time. Behind her stood her 2 enforcers, Greg Ellis, a former nightclub bouncer who looked like he bench-pressed his own ego, and Felicia Ng, the HOA accountant who clutched her clipboard like it was the nuclear codes. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across their faces as they surveyed their destruction. Greg had already torn down the rope ladder, the one Chloe had practiced climbing for hours until her palms were raw but proud. Felicia was photographing every angle, documenting their vandalism as if it were a crime scene, which in a way it was. They'd arrived at 7:15 a.m., knowing most neighbors would be at work, thinking they could execute their raid without witnesses. But Mrs. Thompson from across the street was watching from her window, phone in hand, already calling other neighbors. Chloe had wrapped her small arms around the tree trunk, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy, this is Mommy's house. She made it for me." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I saw Rachel's face. Heard her laugh as we'd planned this treehouse together. My vision blurred briefly, but I forced the emotion down. Secret Service training kicked in. Compartmentalize. Assess. Respond. I stepped out onto the porch, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. "You have 10 seconds to get off my property." The neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Even the morning birds fell silent. Marlene's smirk faltered for just a moment as she took in my stance, feet planted, shoulders square, the posture of someone who'd faced down actual threats, not just suburban bullies. Greg, however, was too pumped up on his own authority to notice the warning signs. He picked up a crowbar, moving toward the main support beam of the treehouse. 9 seconds, I said quietly, my eyes locked on his. Greg Ellis stepped forward, cracking his knuckles in what I'm sure he thought was an intimidating display. "You gonna do something about it? Call the cops?" "The law's on our side, pal." He gestured to the paperwork Marlene was waving like a victory flag. I looked at Chloe, still trembling against the tree, then back at Greg. A smile played at the corners of my mouth, the kind of smile that made foreign dignitaries nervous during my protection details. "No," I said quietly. "I have something much better in mind. Something that'll make bullies like you wish you'd never set foot in my yard." The confrontation ended with Marlene and her crew retreating, but not before she'd slapped me with a $5,000 fine for unauthorized construction. As their car disappeared down Oak Lane, I knelt beside Chloe, wiping her tears. "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's not going to let them take your treehouse." She looked up at me with Rachel's green eyes, hope flickering through the tears. "Promise?" I pulled her close, feeling the weight of another promise. "Promise." That night, after Chloe finally fell asleep clutching her stuffed unicorn, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of bourbon and Marlene's citation. The fine amount struck me as oddly specific. Not the round numbers you'd expect from standard HOA penalties. I pulled out my laptop and started digging through public records. HOA meeting minutes, anything I could find about our dear president. 3 hours and 2 bourbons later, I had a timeline that would make a forensic accountant weep. The deeper I dug, the more patterns emerged. HOA fines always came in specific amounts: $3, $200 here, $5,400 there. Never round numbers, always matching gaps in the association's monthly financial reports. I cross-referenced property records and found something interesting. Every family Marlene had targeted in the past 3 years had young children. The Johnsons had been fined $4,000 for their son's basketball hoop. The Mgwins paid $6,500 for their daughter's playhouse. The Turners were hit with $3,800 for a swing set that had been approved by the previous board. Marlene Dalton had moved to Oakwood Trails 5 years ago, right after her second divorce. Court records painted a picture: a failed law career, disbarment for financial misconduct, a bitter custody battle she'd lost. She'd seized control of the HOA within 6 months, systematically replacing board members with her hand-picked allies. Since then, HOA fees had increased by 300% and mysterious special assessments popped up whenever someone challenged her authority. Her rise to power had been methodical. First, she volunteered for every committee, establishing herself as indispensable. Then she began documenting minor infractions, building files on every homeowner. When the previous president, elderly Mr. Cartwright, tried to rein her in, he suddenly faced allegations of financial impropriety. The charges were dropped after he resigned, but the message was clear: cross Marlene Dalton at your peril. Within a year, she'd installed her own board through a series of special elections that somehow always had unusually low turnout. They smashed through my daughter's treehouse like it was made of paper, not the dreams of a dying mother. 3 thugs in HOA enforcement shirts were destroying the last birthday gift my wife, Rachel, ever gave our 9-year-old Chloe, while my little girl screamed in terror. My coffee mug shattered on the kitchen floor as rage erupted through my body. These suburban tyrants had no idea they just declared war on the wrong father, a former Secret Service agent who'd taken bullets for presidents. I remembered the day we moved to Oakwood Trails, 3 months after Rachel lost her battle with cancer. Chloe was struggling, barely speaking, spending hours alone in her room clutching her mother's old sweater. The treehouse was supposed to be her sanctuary, a place where she could feel close to her mom again. Rachel had sketched the design during her final weeks in the hospital, her frail hands shaking as she drew each detail. "Promise me, Nate," she'd whispered. "Promise me you'll